And I will just introduce our next panelists to join a discussion and a small panel group here. Alexander Brabetz, Director General of the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation ORF, welcome on stage. And it will be moderated by Rosa Lyon, new host and reporter at the ORF. So if you look at the program, you will see that there is also Vinay Rao from YouTube. He was planned to be on stage as well. He had other obligations, so he excused himself to not, or apologized that he couldn't be here. So it's going to be a discussion in this setting. Enjoy, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katrin. Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Such an honor to be on stage with you. I'm going to take a step back. The idea of reason winning over darkness and superstition and all that stuff was the idea of enlightenment and empowering people to fight over authoritarian powers. And since you said this room is so beautiful, in the 17th century, space was key. And it was the coffee houses where people came together and they not only drank alcohol anymore, because at that time, mass and elites, they were all drinking alcohol. They were drunk all the time because water wasn't safe to drink, so it was beer and gin and wine. And when people started drinking coffee and tea, they were suddenly sharper. They were able to think straight. And also, in those coffee houses, people from all different kinds of expertise came together, and their ideas could have sex. So these kinds of places where ideas can have sex are now also digital, thanks to you. And they're amazing. And we're also in a time of age where voices get louder that are against religious tolerance and that are against political liberty and mutual respect. And feelings are trying to rule over facts. And it's dangerous. So from 1 to 10, how worried are you?
Well, I mean, based on what you just said, I was just thinking, I live in London. Mm-hmm. I've been there for several years, coming from America. And the one thing I will say is that British people do drink a lot.
Still,
and maybe in a few years, if they turn back to tea, they'll have to send a letter to Europe saying, we're really sorry, we were drunk. Will you please forgive us? No, I always say that I'm a pathological optimist. And so that means I think everything's going to be fine eventually. But I will say these have been troubling times. I mean, you can imagine my life's work, as I see it, is to bring everyone on the planet a free encyclopedia that should be quality, it should be calm, it should be as neutral as possible. It won't be perfect, but we're going to try really hard. And so when I see, you know, sort of the outrageous, like far more than normal, and I mean, I think Donald Trump is the leading exponent of this, but you know, you always expect politicians to stretch things a bit and make a case that's not quite fair. I mean, just the blatant lying and nobody seems to care. Well, people care, but it's not stopping anyone. It's very upsetting. And it feels a bit like a path to a dark age. I'm optimistic that we will get through it because I think humans have flaws and incredible potential and power, but it is worrying. So scale of 1 to 10, I don't know, 6.4.
What about you, Alexander Brabetz? Do you sleep well?
Yes, most of the times, not particularly these days in front of some elections here in Austria. But in general, I sleep well, and I think that, of course, we are living disruptive times if it comes to journalism. And I think Wikipedia and the Wiki Tribune is much about written journalism. So I want more to concentrate what is the future of video and audio journalism, which is a big difference because it takes more money, not as much more money as it took before, because also video and audio production gets cheaper. But still, it's a big difference. The same is if you think about the archives, the archived knowledge. It's possible for your Wikipedia people and contributors to really sum up the whole knowledge of the world, which is written in bibliotheques and accessible. It's much more difficult if you talk about video and audio content, because this in archives, most of it is in archives of public service media. So if it comes to provide in the future the possibility that people get access to the video and archive and audio archives of the world and the knowledge of the world, we would have to have something like an electronic Wikipedia, which is more difficult. But most of it is in the archives of public service television all over Europe, starting from the BBC to the ORF and ARD and BBC. And we have to find ways to make this accessible in the broader way. So that means we have to also find new ways of audio and video journalism for the present. We are very strong in broadcasting and still radio. Most of the Austrians watch the actual election campaign in television and also listen via radio. But of course, we know that the traditional linear broadcasting is disrupted. So we have to find platforms where we can also, as in a player philosophy, to present this journalism to the public via new platforms.
Do you see Wiki Tribune as like a competition or something that would supplement traditional journalism?
I mean, I think journalism is so big that in one sense everything competes with everything else, but in another sense it has to be complementary. I don't think there is any replacement for serious news organizations doing serious work. We can hopefully contribute to that and participate in that. But I really think diversity in media is important. Quality in media is important, and so all of these things have to come together.
But you tried to hire you hired journalists for your first for the first launch of Wiki Tribune, and then you laid them off.
So it's I would say our first iteration, like the first iteration of Wikipedia, was called Newpedia, didn't quite work. It wasn't growing, it was quite expensive. So this is why I stepped back and said we have to redesign everything from scratch. So we do plan to hire journalists again as we relaunch and as we grow, because I don't think fundamentally like citizen journalism is important and can be more interesting than it has been, but I think there are limitations. There's no way for, and the limitations aren't always what journalists think the limitations are. Some journalists think we're the only ones who can understand the world and write about it objectively, but of course that's not true. But what journalists can do, if you're just an ordinary person, you don't necessarily have interview skills, experience. Often people, the Wikipedia community, they're very, very good at desk research. Certainly if a reporter is spending a lot of time digging through financial documents and things like that, there are a lot of people who could chip in and help out with that. But also, an ordinary person who's just doing this as a hobby and interested in being constructive and having fun doing it, they can't drop everything and chase a story for 4 days, which a journalist in theory could, although not many journalists have that luxury anymore, because it's a lot of churning out a lot of content with fewer and fewer people has been very hard. But I think there's a symbiotic opportunity.
So you mostly work with people you don't have to pay. Is that a model you're jealous of?
Sometimes, no. No, I'm not, because I strongly believe that for democracy, professional journalism is of utmost importance and cannot be replaced by 100%, but I think you also would not think that is the case by amateurs or non-professional journalists. However, we have to acknowledge that some of the business models for professional journalism, you said it, are under strong pressure. And it's very difficult to find for journalism which is funded 100% or to a large degree on commercial income, how to do that. And therefore, I think this example is very interesting what you are pursuing with your project. However, I think we here in Europe in particular have found a model to create professional journalism which is independent of a high commercial income, which is public service media. And therefore, I think public service media as a model in general is maybe more important than in times where journalism, it was easy to finance it via commercial means. But having said that, we also have to reinvent public service media journalism. On the one hand side, on which platform, in which ways we present it to it. On the other hand side, how we change the way to work professionally. And secondly, also to make it all the time very transparent. I think this would also be very important for you, how you do your work, with which principles, which educations, which persons, etc. This is something maybe is a little bit a problem of the Wikipedia. I really would like to know who is writing my Wikipedia entry.
You can see, you can click, and you can go.
Maybe he's here.
Them,
No, he or she is here because, of course, to the very strong position you have, almost a monopoly. And of course, 99% it's correct what is written about me, but 1% is maybe I would personally have a different view. And
which is that 1%? Let's talk about that 1%.
So I think one of the strengths of our reporting as classical media, in television or radio, you have an author of the piece of information which is presented. So you can also argue with that person and have a transparency who is responsible for that information.
And I think this is something that's grown more important, that transparency, because there was a time when more or less the general public would accept, okay, well, this was printed in the New York Times, so therefore I mostly trust it. Maybe you think New York Times leans a little bit left and the Wall Street Journal leans a little bit right, but you mainly trust it. Well, now we're to a point, partly because of Donald Trump, where there is a large section of society who think that the New York Times or CNN or major news organizations just make things up out of thin air. Well, that's terrible. It's not true. But it means that those organizations need to be more transparent than ever in terms of showing their work, proving their case. They can't just say, so one of my big beefs with, and I think this is improving, although I haven't seen any statistics, but sources close to the White House said. And it's like, but who is that? Who said that? And why do you think people who think you're lying are going to believe you, right? You need to really push and force people to actually go on the record more and things like that. So there's a lot of details that I think are really more important than ever before about traditional journalism.
You prefer the word neutrality for Wikipedia. We usually talk about equidistance to all political parties or objectivity. Are we talking about the same thing, Alexander Wrabetz?
I hope so.
Close.
No, of course, but it's several elements of the same very important thing: objectivity, equidistance, also acknowledgement of the diversity of views you present, so that people can make their own judgment on a position, transparency, as we have said, and to be unbiased in general. So this is a package which we have to pursue. Nobody is perfect, and nobody ever will be perfect. It's also something we have to accept and to communicate, that we as journalists can only pursue to reach all our goals. However, something will go wrong, and then we should be able or should be ready to accept this, also to communicate if a mistake has happened, because that gives you in the long run more trust than if you try to avoid to say, yes, maybe we have made a mistake.
Yeah, I think they are effectively very similar, or more or less the same thing. The term equidistant, though, I do have a bit of a problem with, because I think when you're in an era where you have someone like Donald Trump who says completely outrageous and obvious lies, there isn't really a nice halfway point to say, well, maybe the hurricane was going to hit Alabama, maybe not. No, it was never. All the science agrees, everybody agrees, except for one person who's a crazy person. Or actually, one of my favorites, this was one of the best bits of television I had seen in a long time, it was just yesterday. Someone confronted Boris Johnson. He was out on a tour of the NHS. Someone confronted him.
A dad of a sick child?
A dad of a sick child, and he's yelling at him about the cuts to the NHS. Turns out he's also a labor activist, so that's not the story for me. That's interesting. What is interesting is he says, and then how dare you come here for a press opportunity.
And he says, there's no press.
There's no press here. And you can hear the cameras clicking. And the guy's like, and it's like, okay, you can have a debate about the Tory policies on the NHS and how damaging has it been or not, right? That's a legitimate political topic. But when someone stands there,
you can stay away from the debate,
literally
but
says,
if you're there,
right,
yeah.
There's no press here. It's like, what are you talking about? There's anyway, I recommend watching it. It's quite astonishing.
But it was one of the problems. It's always easier to talk about our colleagues than about ourselves for the BBC in the Brexit campaigns. If you have truth and lie, you cannot just say I report both and are equidistant to both positions. Huh? So sometimes you have to also to make it possible for the people to judge which is more true or more lie.
And I think one of the things I'm most proud of about Wikipedia is how much time the community spends chewing on these very kinds of issues, right? Which is to say, what is neutrality? What is the neutral position? At what point do you say, well, this position can't be treated? You know, there are plenty of cases where you can say, you know, here's a debate about the immigration policy, refugee policy in Europe. Here's some pros, here's some cons, here's some different things. And then here's a complete lie. And that you have to say, actually, we can't just treat that as a random claim that could be just as true as anything else. It isn't. And I think that good journalism always has to come to that. And, you know, the BBC got criticized. I see, actually, if you go on Twitter every day, you can see criticism that either the BBC is massively supported Brexit by having Nigel Farage on way too often, or they've been trying to bury Brexit by showing on. I think they've done a reasonable job. I mean, I know this because when I look at Wikipedia and people yell at us for being biased in one direction or the other, I'm like, well, we're not perfect, but we try really hard, and we're sincere about that. So,
the real fight is not between the left and the right. That's what most people would assume. It's between the thoughtful and the jerks. I am quoting you.
Yes.
So one of the big problems in the digital world, as we know, are bubbles and echo chambers. And because people are confronted with more, not different kinds of ideas, but more the same idea, and often more anger or more frustration. So what is it you do to fight that?
So personally, one of the things I do, when I get up in the morning and I look to news, I use Google News. You could use other aggregators. I'm not endorsing Google News in particular, but I use it logged out and actually clear my cookies from time to time, because when you're logged in, they remember the things you've clicked on and the sources you like, and they'll show you more of those. And I actually don't want that. I want to be confronted with a variety of sources.
You want to undermine the algorithm.
I want to, I want to get out of my bubble. One of the things that I said years ago is, you know, I now live in the UK. My wife worked with the Labour Party for many years. So when I came, I was like, well, I've got all of my sort of techno-libertarian friends from the US, and now I've got all my new left-wing friends in the UK. And if they were to have a debate on my Facebook about what is the proper role of government in healthcare, I think it would be very interesting, very challenging. There's a lot of interesting points on both sides and so on. And so I was proud of myself, and I'm like, look, I'm not in a bubble. And then I realized 100% of all of my friends hate Donald Trump. And I'm like, oh, and it sort of goes back to the quote, which had nothing to do with Donald Trump, but it is kind of the party of the left and the party of the right, of thoughtful people who disagree on policy, and then there's just like outrageous nonsense. So, but anyway, I try to break out of the bubble, but it's really hard.
But it's the question. If you said for Wiki Tribune, you want to work with algorithm in the so. I think, and also for news gathering of people and news, it will be important to have it also algorithm-based. But it is important on which way of algorithm and to make it transparent which algorithms you use.
Like what I used
so
to say is,
can make a difference.
If I woke up one morning and Facebook offered me an option and they said, instead of tending to show you things we think you're going to like, we're going to show you things that we think you'll disagree with, but we have signals that they're of quality. Because that's what I really want to read. I want to read a challenging economist who disagrees with me on some important point, like Brexit, but who can actually make an argument that I'm going to find, oh, now that's interesting, I hadn't thought of that. Because that's how you grow intellectually, is confronting ideas that you don't agree with, but that are thoughtful. And so that's what I really want to prioritize. And if other people do, then it'll be successful. If nobody else does, I'll have fun doing it myself. So,
are we doing enough to fight those echo chambers?
I think principally by not forcing echo chambers and reaching 90% of the population with our information every day, we do a lot. But it has to be done more in our new platform future to find the algorithms of the future, to make them transparent, as you said, to really also be competitive with our information services and open to the whole public in the future.
Let's dare to take a little look into the future. You said you are a notorious optimist. If we think of the Israeli author Harari, he describes a terrible, terrible future of mankind making itself obsolete. Could you draw a slightly brighter picture for us?
Well, I mean, I think that fundamentally we're going through a huge disruption in the ecosystem around quality information. But what I believe is that human beings are the same as they were 50 years ago, 100 years ago. There is a desire for quality. People do want to know. They want to base their decisions on facts. And so while we're in a tough place, I remain optimistic. I also think, there was I saw a news story this morning, on a lot of the measures of the Sustainable Development Goals, we're making huge progress. Infant mortality, maternal mortality, education levels around the world. There is huge progress in the world. There's a lot of optimism we can have, even around some aspects of climate change, although that's probably where we're the worst off. And so there are reasons to be quite optimistic. I mean, people are really interested and excited by the prospect of driverless cars, and I am too, and I think it's amazing. And I think one of the things that's going to be incredible about that is the idea that we accept fairly routinely that dying in a car accident is a thing that happens to a lot of people. We will think that's, amazing. I think in 100 years people will look back and they were like, people drove cars? Are you kidding? Like, people are very bad at that sort of thing, And so I'm optimistic. I think technology and I think the progress of the world, we're going through some rough bumps at the moment, but I think hatred of others, disintegration, rabid nationalism, rabid racism, these things are eternal human themes that rise and fall, and I think they'll fall again. I just hope we don't forget the terrible lessons of the past century, and it doesn't take hundreds of millions of deaths before we wake up to say, actually, we're all humans on this planet. We better think together.
Are you as optimistic?
I am sure that with all the challenges which will come up together with the digital disruption and new world, if you have strong media, strong journalism, strong ways to communicate with people, to inform them, then you always will have the possibility then also to find regulations for those elements of the future which are dangerous. I think one thing, if we talk how problematic many aspects of the digital world are, but one thing is for sure, that never before so many 100 millions of people had access to the full knowledge of the world via Wikipedia, for example. So this is something which makes us optimistic that there are also very beautiful aspects of the future.
Microsoft President Brad Smith just published a book called Tools and Weapons, The Promise and the Peril of the Digital Age, and he demands for way more regulation. Would you agree?
I don't know. I have not read his book. I'm such a Wikipedia.
Well, he says almost no technology has gone so entirely unregulated for so long as the digital technology. Would you see that as well?
I mean, that is true, I would say, probably.
But you'd say it's a good thing.
It's been mostly a good thing, but I think that on any kind of issue like this, I don't think it's really easy to sort of knee-jerk say, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. And I'm more interested in saying, okay, well, what should we do? What are the specific proposals? I mean, when we talk about things like cybercrime, for example, I think I'm concerned. I just saw a story for the first time ever. There was some sort of, I need to learn the story better, so I'll give a vague approximation. It was a crime committed by tricking someone into wiring money in a business context by using an artificial sort of machine learning algorithm to create a fake voice. And so they got recordings. So you could get lots of recordings of Bill Gates' voice. You could get lots of recording of my voice, but if you try to steal my money, you wouldn't get as much. So go for Bill Gates. And you can imagine creating basically a way that he could call to a trusted person and say, oh yeah, we just need to send this money here. And it sounds exactly like them, and someone would believe him, and they send the money. That's going to become easier and easier and easier. And so that kind of cybercrime is coming really fast, and it's going to disrupt a lot of things. Obviously, in news, there's a lot of concern about deep fakes and what that's going to do to video evidence and things like that. That all of those things are coming. They're going to happen. They're going to be bad in certain ways. And so that's where you say, actually, I don't know what we need to do about that, but one example is that fighting that kind of cybercrime is very, very difficult because the jurisdictions are everywhere. You know, how are you going to arrest someone for robbing a bank in Austria if they are in Vietnam? Okay, that's complicated, right? And we don't really have the right levels of cooperation and so on. And so I think there's a lot about our legal frameworks and our traditional frameworks that are not well prepared to deal with a coming age of really international harms of various kinds.
We're actually running out of time, but I have one last question, and that is about money, because you invented such an amazing universal public service, Wikipedia, and it doesn't even cost a lot of money to run it, as you explained in one of your TED Talks. And we, as a public broadcaster, have the explicit mission to serve the public. Wouldn't Wiki Tribune be a wonderful public service as well?
Well, I hope it will be a public service, but I don't.
But you want money for it. It's not a non-profit organization.
It's not non-profit. It might be someday. I don't know, but okay. I mean, it's basically. I'm investing all my money in it, so there's that. And but I really think. I mean, one of the problems is that one of the best tools for creating something new is a startup, an independent startup with somebody who is able to just make decisions without a lot of overhead. Larger organizations have a really hard time innovating in that way. They try, but and it's not the fault of any one thing. It's just structurally, it's very rare, for even Microsoft completely missed more than one revolution despite having all the resources in the world. And so I just don't believe that, the BBC is going to invent. Actually, I remember I visited the BBC when Wikipedia was very young, and I talked to many people there, and so many people said, wow, this is what the BBC should be doing. And I was like, well, why don't you do something like this? And they're like, well, it's hard in a huge organization to get the authorization and so on. And the entrepreneurial model means there's lots and lots of failures, things don't work, but it is a model that is a fertile ground for innovation. So.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, no questions.
Great.
All of you that's out there been having fun with Gwen, we gonna do it again. Listen, are you ready? Put your hands together now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh, man,